Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. In almost the exact same moment that the ghost face spoke, the golden lightning bolt distorted, and a man walked out, clad in a green robe, an imperial crown on his head. He seemed threatening without being angry, and had such profound energy that he could be none other than the Celestial. You managed to keep yourself hidden for a long time. At long last, I've found you. Smiling excitedly, the Celestial blurred into motion toward the ghost face. The ghost face let out a piercing cry. He knew that he couldn't escape this fight, and therefore, he charged directly into battle. In the shortest of moments, deafening booms were ringing out. Bai Xiaochun had just barely escaped with his life, and yet, wasn't happy about that at all. In fact, coldness gripped his heart. He couldn't stop thinking about how unhappy Du Lingfei seemed at the idea of her father coming, and that was very strange. Just now, the Celestial had emerged from the golden light surrounding Du Lingfei. Furthermore, she had said that he was already here. That in turn seemed to imply that the Celestial had intentionally allowed both of them to be put into extreme danger within that black smoke, all to get the opportunity he sought. Clearly, he had been after a chance to strike at the ghost face. And that opportunity was worth more to him than the safety of his own daughter. Having reached this point in his train of thought, Bai Xiaochun looked over at Du Lingfei and could see the bitter disappointment in her eyes. Much of what Bai Xiaochun knew about the Celestial was only speculation and conjecture. But as the man's daughter, Du Lingfei knew him well. She had originally assumed that her father really had sent her and Bai Xiaochun into the north to find out the truth about whether her eldest sister was alive or not. But now, she realized that the matter of her eldest sister had apparently been secondary in importance. The Celestial had thrown both her and Bai Xiaochun out as bait to try to reel in the ghost face from the bone galleon. Although she couldn't be sure why her father thought that she and Bai Xiaochun would be enough to entice the ghost face, clearly, it had worked. Father, she thought, everything you do is to leave this world. But, is it all worth it? Is the mere act of leaving more important than family? Du Lingfei felt like her heart was being torn apart as she watched her father fighting the ghost face. By now, the Celestial's injuries had recovered significantly, and for some unknown reason, the ghost face was not able to get the upper hand. Snorting coldly, the Celestial advanced and said, "It wasn't easy tracking you down. Don't even think about trying to get away." The ghost face chuckled coldly. "Using your own flesh and blood to lure me out? You definitely live up to your reputation of being ambitious and ruthless, yeah? So what?" Apparently, the Celestial didn't see anything wrong at all with using his daughter the way he had. After all, she was still alive. And the enigmatic ghost face was almost impossible to track down once it went into hiding. He was absolutely determined to capture him, and so to him, using Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei as bait was well worth it. Not only did he plan to use the ghost face to come to a better understanding of the world beyond, but he also hoped to refine him into a personal treasure. Success would give him a boost in battle prowess that might help him force the Gravekeeper to open the world gate. If not, perhaps the knowledge he gained would allow him to do that on his own. The truth was that the Celestial had been overcome with despair when the Bone Galleon left. And the fact that the ghost face had stayed behind of his own initiative gave him one final possibility to succeed before resorting to the final method that he wished to avoid. The Celestial and the laughing crying ghost face rose higher and higher into the sky as they fought, and also began to move off into the distance, until they weren't even visible. At that point, the screaming wind that battered the ice plain finally died down, and everything went calm. However, Bai Xiaochun simply could not calm his heart and mind. And unfortunately, he didn't know how to comfort Du Lingfei. Sighing, he walked over, slowly wrapped his arms around her and picked her up. She went stiff at first, but as she felt the warmth of his arms and chest, she slowly sagged into his arms, as if from exhaustion. "He was never like this before," she murmured. All of a sudden, she seemed profoundly weak, causing Bai Xiaochun to sigh. After a while, she seemed to pull herself together. Looking up at him, she softly said, "What do you think, Xiaochun? Is it really that important to leave this world?" "I don't really know," he said, shaking his head. "But I do know that if it were me, I wouldn't want to leave. I like the lands of Heavenspan, and I even like the wildlands. Why the hell would I want to leave?" He spoke the truth from the bottom of his heart. The Celestial made it seem like the lands of Heavenspan were a prison that he couldn't wait to escape from, an attitude that Bai Xiaochun just couldn't understand. As far as he was concerned, as long as he had enough longevity, and had his friends and family with him, then the lands of Heavenspan were wonderful. Furthermore, Ghost Mother had made it obvious that the world beyond was a strange and dangerous place. Why would anyone want to jump headfirst into danger? Although, to be fair, Bai Xiaochun also felt like the gravekeeper was being a bit unreasonable. If the Celestial wanted to leave, why not just open the world gate for him? Du Lingfei smiled in response to his words, a beautiful smile that seemed to brighten the surrounding darkness of night. As the moonlight fell down onto them, surrounded as they were by ice, it was a lovely scene. I don't want to leave here either, she murmured. I'm the same as you. I just want peace and quiet and my friends and family. A simple life. Except, I don't even have any friends. Xiaochun, look at me. After all the years I've lived, I don't have even a single one. And I don't even know what my own mother looked like. Bai Xiaochun didn't say anything in response. Holding her even tighter, he began to walk forward aimlessly through the night. Eventually the sun rose off in the distance, casting its warm radiance across the lands. Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei had walked the whole night, but now they stopped in place. All of a sudden, a golden lightning bolt appeared up in the sky, which pierced through the air for a time until it resolved into the form of a man in a green robe. The Celestial had returned. He held a ball of black smoke in his hand, which was none other than the laughing, crying ghost face. It did not struggle, and could not escape. Clearly, his efforts to capture the thing had been a success. The Celestial's expression was grim and unsightly as he scanned the area with divine sense until he located Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei. It was only after capturing the laughing, crying ghost face that the Celestial realized he wasn't complete. It was only a soul clone. The true soul was still missing. Clearly the ghost face was a profound schemer, and although he had been somewhat moved by the bait the Celestial had cast out, he had still decided to rely on a secret magic to split off part of himself in the form of a soul clone, just to be safe. Although the Celestial had successfully captured the soul clone, he had also alerted his enemy, which would make it even more difficult to get the true soul. Furthermore, it was obvious that, for the time being, his opponent would remain in hiding, and would make sure not to leave any clues as to his location. However, at least he had not come out completely empty-handed. Although the soul clone wasn't a complete soul, it was better than nothing. With such thoughts on his mind, the Celestial took a deep breath and looked down at Bai Xiaochun and Du Lingfei. Waving his hand, he sent a medallion flying downward. Eyes flickering, Bai Xiaochun slowly reached out to grab it. Don't think too much into it, the Celestial said. It's just a command medallion. Now you can go back to the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect and use their teleportation portal to return to the Eastern Heavenspan region. With that, he ignored Bai Xiaochun and turned his gaze to Du Lingfei. Let's go, fair, he said softly. Du Lingfei hesitated for a moment but didn't refuse. Hugging Bai Xiaochun tightly, she said her goodbyes. However, Bai Xiaochun refused to simply let her go. Looking up at the Celestial, he gritted his teeth and said, Celestial, Fei Fei and I. Before he could finish speaking, the Celestial's eyes glittered with cold light, and he interrupted, I know what you want to say. You want me to leave my daughter here with you. Unfortunately, you don't qualify. We can talk about it when you're a demigod. With that, he turned and vanished into thin air. Du Lingfei shook her head and took a deep breath to calm her heart. Then she followed the Celestial and vanished into thin air. Bai Xiaochun stood there for a while, complicated emotions filling him. Once upon a time, he had assumed that as the daughter of the Celestial, Du Lingfei would have a very high standing, and as a result, plenty of happiness. But after what had just occurred on the icy plains of the north, he realized how bitter her life was, and how coldly the Celestial treated her. Demigod, huh, he murmured. His eyes suddenly glittered with unswerving determination. Back when Bai Xiaochun had first become part of the cultivation world, he had never even heard of demigods, let alone had it as a goal to become one. But now that he was in the mid-diva realm, he was actually very close to that level. Furthermore, back in Giant Ghost City in the Wildlands, he had acquired a drop of soul blood from the Giant Ghost King, which had temporarily allowed him to experience what it was like to be a demigod. Even more important was how the baby girl had told him that the lands in the north were the foundation of a magical item, and were filled with countless reserves of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Although he couldn't be sure if that good fortune would allow him to achieve a full cultivation-based breakthrough, he did know that it would enable him to crush anyone in the diva realm. Furthermore, he might even be able to fight a demigod. Finally, he took a deep breath and transformed into a bright beam of light that shot over the horizon. A few days later, he found a suitable ice river in which to carve out an immortal's cave, where he sat down cross-legged. Worried about repercussions from the Celestial, he didn't immediately call out to the baby girl, but instead, decided to wait. After half a month went by without the Celestial returning, Bai Xiaochun finally started to feel confident. However, he still waited for another 3 months. Finally, he couldn't wait any longer. His eyes opened, and he took a deep breath as he pulled the coffin out of his bag of holding. Looking at it hesitantly, he said, "Everything that needs to be said between myself and the frigid matriarch has been said. It won't do her any good to try to pull a fast one on me." Gritting his teeth, he pulled out the ice leaf and placed it gently down onto the surface of the coffin. The leaf instantly sank down into the coffin and landed onto the baby girl's forehead. Dazzling light flashed, and the leaf disappeared. Even as Bai Xiaochun looked nervously at the coffin, an excited voice that he hadn't heard in quite some time suddenly spoke into his mind. "The aura of the north, frigid coldness, the aura of awakening. You've done well. When I fully awaken, it will only last for 100 breaths. I can't do it now. Follow my directions to the entry node. Once there, I can wake up fully, and the countdown of 100 breaths will begin. That will be the time to open the entrance to the magical item." Bai Xiaochun shivered with apprehension. He had put a lot of thought into this matter over the past months, but since he had made his decision, he rose to his feet and began to follow the baby girl's directions. He left the Immortals' cave, and then began to trek deep into the ice plains of the north. Before long, he was led to a mighty ice river. After looking around the area briefly, he stomped his foot on the ground, which caused an enormous crevice to open up. He looked down at the crevice, then flew inside. On occasion, he found barriers of ice blocking his way, which he would simply destroy. After the time it takes an incense stick to burn, he was far beneath the surface of the plain. He was now in an enormous ice cave that was filled with strong frigid qi. Ice spikes jutted out everywhere, as well as smaller rivers of ice, making the entire place seem very dangerous. As soon as he was in the cave, he realized that, far below on the ground was a huge lake that looked like a mirror. The surface of the lake was covered with smooth ice that radiated a feeling of extreme age. Everything was silent as he floated down and landed on the lake, within which he could see his reflection. The entire place seemed profoundly mysterious. "I'm here. You know what the consequences will be if you're lying to me, right? I'm not going to fight you for control of the magical item. As long as you don't do anything to hurt me, we'll be fine. But if you have any ill intentions, you're dead. I'm sure you know which is the best choice for you to make." At this point, the baby girl's excited voice sounded in his mind. "This is the place. Hurry up and take out the coffin." Bai Xiaochun didn't hesitate to do just that. He took out the coffin and gently placed it down onto the surface of the mirror lake. Almost immediately, the coffin began to shine with bright light, and powerful fluctuations began to roll off of it. At this point, the baby girl's voice again rang out into his mind. "Thank you for your help, Bai Xiaochun. Don't worry, you won't regret this. And no, I'm not lying to you. I left this soul entrance node into the magical item years ago. This is the only location to get into the world that exists inside of it. I need 100 breaths of time to open the node. Once it's open, we'll both be sucked into the magical item. After we're inside, I'll need some time to fuse with the magical item and become its spirit automaton. As for you, feel free to absorb the energy of heaven and earth that has built up inside over the innumerable years which have passed. Trust me, when the two of us come out again, you will not regret your decision." The baby girl couldn't suppress the excitement in her voice. As she finished speaking, the coffin began to shine with dazzling light, and at the same time, to melt. As the coffin melted, Bai Xiaochun could see the baby girl growing larger. In the blink of an eye, she was a beautiful young woman. Then, she began to shine so brightly that it was impossible to see anything of her beyond her outline. A powerful aura began to radiate out from her, which didn't rise up into the air, but rather, shot down toward the mirror lake. The lake became water, which started rippling back and forth as the young woman sank down into it. That caused the ripples to grow more intense, and sent rumbling sounds echoing out in all directions. Bai Xiaochun's heart raced as he looked on nervously. One breath of time after another ticked past as the ripples grew more intense, and the young woman sank into the resulting vortex. The vortex spun slowly at first, but after 20 breaths of time, it was spinning quite rapidly. As the vortex connected with the power of the energy node, a tunnel was forming that led into the magical item. At 40 breaths of time, the rumbling grew so intense that it was impossible to hear anything else. Many of the ice spikes and ice rivers couldn't sustain the intense sound, and shattered. However, Bai Xiaochun wasn't paying attention to that. All of his attention was focused on the vortex. 50 breaths, 60 breaths, 70 breaths. Bai Xiaochun's heart was pounding as the vortex spun with utter madness. By this point, he was fairly certain that he could see something that resembled a cave-like tunnel inside of the vortex. Beyond that tunnel was another world. 30 breaths of time left. Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but take a few steps closer. However, even as he did, a familiar voice suddenly echoed out. It sounded like a screaming wind mixed with laughter and wailing. As soon as Bai Xiaochun heard the voice, his face fell, and he spun to see a shadowy figure blurring into the cave through the crevice above. You? Didn't the Celestial capture you? Bai Xiaochun's mind began to spin at the possibility that the Celestial might also be present. The Celestial? He only got a soul clone. This shadowy figure was none other than the laughing, crying ghost face. The ghost face cackled as he looked down at the vortex, his eyes shining with greed. Although Bai Xiaochun found the ghost face's response to be shocking, at least it indicated that the Celestial wasn't present. Unfortunately, he also knew that he wasn't even close to being a match for this ghost face, and the fact that he had a greedy gleam in his eyes caused his heart to begin pounding. Damn it, how did the Celestial screw up like that? He only got a soul clone? Bai Xiaochun immediately began to edge backward. So, the ghost face said loudly, it turns out there's a world treasure hidden beneath these ice plains. Ha ha ha. The Celestial doesn't realize it, but you can't fool me. It turns out that shadowing you was a good choice after all. Sacrificing a soul clone will definitely be worth it if I can sow destiny with a magical item like this. With it, this whole world can be mine. Eyes shining with unprecedented brightness and radiated terrifying cultivation base fluctuations, he advanced. Damn it, there are still 20 breaths left. Face pale, Bai Xiaochun backed up nervously. He was very well aware that, even despite being incomplete, the laughing, crying ghost face still had battle prowess equivalent to a demigod, and was something he couldn't possibly fight against. As he backed up, the ghost face floated down, eyes gleaming with greed. Ignoring Bai Xiaochun completely, he headed toward the center of the vortex. This world treasure is mine, the ghost face cackled excitedly. Bai Xiaochun's eyes had already begun to blaze with anger. Although he couldn't be exactly sure of what would happen if the baby girl's efforts were interrupted, even the stupidest person in the world could guess that it would be bad. I can't let this happen, he thought, his eyes turning bloodshot. If the ghost face took control of the magical item, not only would he and the baby girl fail at the last minute, but it was possible he could lose his poor little life. After all, there was no way the ghost face would let him leave to spread word of what had occurred. There was no time to consider what to do, or to worry about what might happen. Bai Xiaochun howled, immediately resorting to the forefather transformation to charge toward the ghost face. He only took 3 steps, but had already reached the 5th transformation. His left eye shone with moonlight, providing an explosive increase to his power. Then he added in the living mountain incantation. All of his combined cultivation base and fleshly body power temporarily gave him a level of power that surpassed the late Diva realm. Although he wasn't quite in the Great Circle, he was very close. A blast of wind echoed out as he used his undying hex to shoot forward and appear directly in front of the ghost face. You're not going anywhere, he roared in a voice that crackled like heavenly thunder, simultaneously unleashing the undying Emperor's fist. He didn't hold anything back. He poured all of his fleshly body power into the blow, forcing the ghost face to turn and look at him. However, a gleam of scorn appeared in the ghost face's eyes as, instead of retreating, he lunged forward to meet Bai Xiaochun's undying Emperor's fist. A massive boom echoed out. Blood sprayed from Bai Xiaochun's mouth as he tumbled backward, his undying Emperor's fist routed, his living mountain incantation shattered, and his forefather transformation vanquished. You think a bit too much of yourself, the ghost face said with a cold snort. Turning, he headed back toward the center of the vortex. However, thanks to the power of his undying blood, Bai Xiaochun's injuries were already recovering rapidly. As the ghost face continued onward, Bai Xiaochun roared and used his mountain-shaking bash to shoot forward. He performed a double-handed incantation gesture, calling upon his water swamp kingdom. At the same time, he sent frigid chi roiling out, within which appeared numerous frigid projections that lunged at the ghost face. Worried that it wasn't enough, he slapped his bag of holding and produced a handful of multicolored flame, which he also threw out in front of him. Boom! Cracks spread out in the surrounding ice, and the intense heat of the sea of flames that resulted from the detonation of the multicolored flame caused much of it to melt. Even the laughing, crying ghost face, who currently had demigod battle prowess, couldn't help but frown. Normally speaking, the ghost face could deal with these attacks with ease, and could also kill Bai Xiaochun fairly easily. However, he was worried about the fluctuations of the battle attracting attention. Furthermore, he had noticed that there appeared to be something within the vortex, fusing with the magical item. He was in no mood to tangle with Bai Xiaochun. What he needed to do was get into the magical item before the fusing process was complete, and make sure that he was the one to fuse with it. I'll handle you in a moment, he said with a cold snort. Then, he unhesitatingly called upon a bizarre curse, uttered in a language that did not originate within the lands of Heavenspan. As he did, the black smoke which surrounded him transformed into 9 magical symbols, which swirled through the air toward Bai Xiaochun. Those 9 magical symbols seemed to contain the power of essence, and although they were weaker than they had been when the ghost face used them in the past, they still shone with dazzling light. Despite unleashing the 9 magical symbols, the ghost face didn't stop for a moment. He continued onward, ignoring Bai Xiaochun's mountain-shaking bash, the water swamp kingdom, and the shocking sea of flames. As for the magical symbols, they swirled around him, piercing through all of Bai Xiaochun's divine abilities to appear directly in front of him. When the magical symbols slammed into him, his chest caved in, and he coughed up gobs upon gobs of blood. It was a grievous injury that caused his vision to swim as he was thrown violently backward. As Bai Xiaochun was flung away, the greed in the ghost face's eyes grew more intense, and he closed in on the center of the vortex. If he entered the vortex, the consequences would be unimaginable. In his madness, Bai Xiaochun opened his heavenspan Dharma eye, sending out a beam of light that wrapped around the ghost face. The ghost face paused for a moment, but regained motion a moment later. He was angry and frustrated, but didn't have time to spare worrying about Bai Xiaochun. He continued forward until half of his head was in the vortex itself. At that point, a voice echoed into Bai Xiaochun's mind. There are only a few breaths of time left. Stop him. Eyes bloodshot, Bai Xiaochun shouted, "You're forcing me to do this, ghost face." Bai Xiaochun had no options left. He quickly crushed a drop of undying blood, causing a towering level of blood qi to surge through him from head to toe. His eyes suddenly looked profoundly evil as he took a step forward, energy pulsing. He was already beginning to lose control of his consciousness and act on instinct alone. As the Godkiller was unleashed, he suddenly became voraciously interested in any type of life force. Before the ghost face could even sense the surging blood qi of the Godkiller, Bai Xiaochun was right in front of him. Bai Xiaochun reached out with his right hand and grabbed onto him viciously. Instantly, a tremor ran through the ghost face, and a sensation of deep crisis rose up inside of him. And then, he was ripped out from the vortex. Howling, the ghost face spun to see Bai Xiaochun pulsing with blood qi. Damn it, is this blood magic? The ghost face couldn't have been more shocked by how dangerous Bai Xiaochun seemed in this moment. In the moment that the ghost face was hauled out into the open, the baby girl reached the end of the 100 breaths of time. The vortex surged mightily as a powerful gravitational force erupted out, dragging everything in the area toward the opening. Neither Bai Xiaochun nor the ghost face had any control over their own bodies as they were swept up. Maybe I failed on my first attempt, but once I'm inside that magical item, I'll figure out another way to take control. The ghost face was furious, but at the same time, could see that something was off about Bai Xiaochun. This guy's divine soul is weak, making it difficult for him to use that blood magic properly. Otherwise, he would be really difficult to deal with. The ghost face snorted coldly as he was dragged into the vortex. However, he still managed to send his magical symbols shooting toward Bai Xiaochun again. How dare you make things difficult for me? Now that you've lost consciousness and are acting on instinct, it's the perfect time to seal you. Mysterious light shot out from his eyes as the 9 magical symbols surrounded Bai Xiaochun, overlapping with each other as they sent out mountain-toppling, sea-draining power. Layer by layer, the power of sealing settled onto Bai Xiaochun. Even as the sealing marks fell into place, the vortex rumbled with thunderous intensity, and both Bai Xiaochun and the ghost face were dragged inside. As they were, the lake and the ice cave began to crumble. In the depths of the northern Heavenspan River region was an ice plain that was currently collapsing in on itself. The affected area grew deeper and wider until an enormous ice crater appeared. It almost looked like a huge fist had punched down onto the ice, creating an eye-catching scar in the landscape. The trembling of the land was detectable at great distances, ensuring that the 9 Heavens Cloud Lightning sect noticed. Master Cloud Lightning and the other devas investigated it, and even the demigod patriarch came for a personal visit. However, no amount of searching provided any clues as to what had caused the event. All evidence had been sucked away by that vortex. Troubling times, the patriarch said with a sigh and a shake of his head. Normally speaking, he would have been more focused on digging until he figured out what had occurred. But now he wasn't in the mood for that. He turned to look in the direction of Heavenspan Island, and then back in the direction of the wildlands. Deep in his eyes, the glint of exhaustion could be seen. The truth was that he was not very happy about the matter of the trial by fire, and the celestial so-called search for an apprentice. In fact, that dissatisfaction was why he had so openly emphasized in front of Du Lingfei that the North was a powerful, autonomous entity. Of course, even if he were more dissatisfied than he already was, he could never express it openly to the Celestial. However, he knew that he wasn't the only dissatisfied one. After the apocalyptic battle in the Wildlands, and the failure of the venture inside the Bone Galleon, the Celestial only had one choice left. It seems the war will be starting soon, the Patriarch murmured. Sighing, he turned and left. After the cultivators from the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect left, the area surrounding the crater was very quiet. Snow began to fall again. In the years to come, the falling snow would turn into hard-packed ice, which would slowly build up. Eventually, the crater would be filled in, and although it would always look odd, it would eventually be more a part of the landscape than the gaping wound it was now. Far, far beneath the surface, in a place that demigods and likely not even the Celestial would notice, was the world treasure. Inside of that treasure existed a unique world. It was a magical item whose form reflected the North as a whole, with an interior that was only about 30% as large as the northern Heavenspan River region itself. Only the middle region of that interior world was icy like the North. In the east, there was a huge sea that was as clear as the rainwater which occasionally fell out of the sky. There was no lightning or thunder with that rain, as though it fell out of nowhere for all eternity, constantly filling in a sea which never overflowed. There was a sea in the west as well, but not a sea of water. It was a sea of raging fire that cast a crimson glow into the sky, a light which was visible from far in the distance. The way the sky burned in unison with the sea below would shock anyone to the core. In terms of size, the eastern sea of rainwater and the western sea of fire were about the same. The seas to the east and west weren't the only strange things about this world. In the south and north were the thunderclouds and the wind valleys. In the south, the land itself was dry and parched, not because of fire, but because of the endless thunderclouds in the sky. The thunderclouds were so thick and numerous that they were almost black, and were filled with endless bolts of lightning. The lightning contained terrifying power that would decimate the ground wherever it landed. It was really a shocking sight, even from a distance. As for the north, it was filled with numerous intersecting mountain ranges that looked almost like twisting, coiling dragons. The mountains created countless valleys which would fill with explosive wind, thus turning the north into a land of wind valleys. The screaming wind in the north was loud enough to shake the soul of anyone who heard it, especially when considering the barren landscape. Apparently, any living thing that tried to stand up to that wind would be transformed into rubble. In sharp contrast to those four other areas was the central region, which seemed much safer and calmer. At the moment, a person could be seen crossing the ice plain. Shivering with cold, he would move along, occasionally looking around to size up his surroundings. He looked very nervous. He was none other than Bai Xiaochun. "You tricked me, frigid matriarch," he growled, scowling on the verge of tears. He had been dragged into this world 2 days before. Despite being pulled in along with the ghost face, the two of them ended up in completely different areas. His godkiller technique had ended as soon as he entered, and he had recovered his senses. Furthermore, the ghost face's sealing technique had been dispelled. The first thing he did was find a place to hide, after which he began to carefully explore the area. However, after 2 days, he was already beginning to understand what this world was like, and it left him with a very bad feeling. There's no accumulation of spiritual energy here. You're a liar, frigid matriarch. One of the main reasons he had worked so hard to help the frigid matriarch, and to fight the terrifying ghost face, was so that he could use the supposed spiritual energy of heaven and earth in here to further his cultivation. But now that he was inside, he didn't see even a scrap of energy. Worse, the ghost face was also somewhere inside, and encountering him would make things very difficult. Bai Xiaochun felt like he was already going mad with frustration. The more he thought about the situation, the worse his mood got. Even stranger was that he couldn't perform any teleportations. Eventually, he threw his head back and howled, "Don't play dead, frigid matriarch. Get out and face me." In the 2 days since his arrival, he hadn't heard the voice of the baby girl in his mind even once. She seemed to be completely ignoring him. That added an anger to his depression. However, he didn't dare to yell too loudly. "I'm definitely going to tell the gravekeeper about this. And my apprentice. And you know what, I'm going to tell the Celestial too." Eventually, he simply sighed and proceeded along his way through the ice plain. The main thing he wanted to do was avoid the laughing, crying ghost face. Unfortunately, despite how large the ice plain was, he was actually lucky to have not encountered him in the first 2 days. On the third day, even as he proceeded along cautiously, a sensation of imminent crisis caused him to shiver, and then push forward with incredible speed. Off in the distance was a dense patch of black smoke, which rapidly resolved into the image of an enormous ghost face, which was looking at Bai Xiaochun with a cold smirk. Apparently, it had noticed him much earlier. "You caused me a big delay, you little punk. I think I'll skin you alive and turn you into a kite. That'll make me feel a bit better." With that, the smoke seethed as the ghost face shot toward Bai Xiaochun. "Senior ghost face, you have to listen to me." Bai Xiaochun shrieked in terror. "I'm a victim here too. That frigid matriarch is a total scoundrel. Look, why don't we join forces?" However, even as his words continued to echo out, the ghost face opened his mouth, revealing a gaping, smoking maw that appeared right above Bai Xiaochun's head. Bai Xiaochun's scalp was tingling so hard it felt like it might explode. Not having any time to think, he unleashed the power of his cultivation base to fight back when, all of a sudden, he heard the frigid matriarch speaking in his ear. "Don't worry, I'll get you out of there." All of a sudden, he sensed a teleportation power wrapping around him. Right before the ghost face swallowed him up, rumbling sounds echoed out, along with dazzling light, and he vanished. When he reappeared, he was 500 kilometers away. Just as he was about to breathe a sigh of relief, another burst of teleportation power rose up, and he began to fade away again. In the moment before he vanished, the air ripped open, and the ghost face appeared. Seeing that Bai Xiaochun was about to escape, the ghost face howled, "Where do you think you're going?" The ghost face pursued him madly, and yet, even relying on his own teleportations, he still couldn't catch up. "Killing that kid isn't that important. I need to get control of this magical item first." Realizing that he wouldn't be able to catch up to Bai Xiaochun anytime soon, the ghost face stopped chasing him, and instead flew up into the sky to try to figure out how to gain control of the magical item. Bai Xiaochun lost track of how many times he was teleported, but he felt like all of his 5 yin organs and 6 yang organs were about to be ripped to shreds. Eventually, he appeared in an ice cave somewhere on the ice plain. Even he wasn't sure exactly where he was. If it weren't for his powerful fleshly body and the regenerative capabilities of his undying blood, he most likely would be dead. In fact, he was so dizzy it took him several breaths of time to recover. However, despite the fact that he was still a bit angry, some hope had finally appeared. Worried that the frigid matriarch might have heard his dialogue with the ghost face, he decided that it would be best to try to smooth things out. "I thought you had just used me and dumped me, frigid crone." At this point, the frigid matriarch's voice echoed out into his mind yet again. "That old ghost caused some problems with the fusion process. I'm afraid it's going to take quite a bit of time. I need 4 or 5 years at least." 4 or 5 years? Bai Xiaochun replied, stunned. "Are you kidding me?" All of a sudden, he got a very bad feeling about where things were going. "This is no joke," the frigid matriarch continued. "I can't reopen the entrance before I finish the process. Therefore, you need to live here for the next few years." When Bai Xiaochun heard her explanation, he nearly exploded. "So, you did screw me over after all," he shouted, forgetting about trying to be safe. "There's no spiritual energy at all in this damn place. How am I supposed to practice cultivation? And what about that ghost? How am I supposed to survive for 5 years with him around? I want out of here. Now, technically speaking, there is no spiritual energy," the frigid matriarch said coolly. "But in the east, there is a sea of rain. In the west is the flaming sky. In the south are the thunderclouds. And in the north are the wind valleys. Those areas formed through convergences of spiritual energy. Just go there, and you shouldn't have any problem absorbing the energy. I can't do anything about that old ghost right now, and I can't expel him. However, as I gain further control of the magical item, I'll be able to slowly suppress him and lower his cultivation base. Take advantage of the good fortune here, and your cultivation base should progress by leaps and bounds. Just hang in there for a few years, and before long, you'll be strong enough to deal with him yourself. After I completely fuse with the magical item and become its spirit automaton, I'll need to sleep for a bit of time before fully activating it. Don't worry, before I sleep, I'll make sure you can leave. After fully activating the treasure, the north will rise to prominence, and our agreement will be fulfilled." Unfortunately, this explanation only made Bai Xiaochun more frantic and nervous. Waving his hand urgently, he said, "Hold on, let me get this straight. You mean I need to wait 4 or 5 years until you become the spirit automaton? Then, you'll open the entrance and let me out. But afterward, you need to sleep for a bit more time to be able to fully activate the magical item?" Exactly. After hearing this, Bai Xiaochun felt even more than ever like he was about to go crazy. "Well, how come you didn't explain that beforehand? Why'd you wait until we were inside before telling me? How was I supposed to know that some old ghost would follow you and sneak inside? Look, it is what it is. I need a few years to become the spirit automaton, and before then, nobody can leave. You're on your own now, alright? With a cold snort, the frigid matriarch retracted her consciousness, leaving Bai Xiaochun completely alone. Hey, hold on a second, he shouted. However, no amount of shouting and yelling got any response. In the end, he tugged at his hair in frustration and bitterness and said, liars. Everyone's a liar. I guess I'm just too pure and simple. The idea of being stuck in this place for 4 or 5 years filled him with despair. Maybe if the old ghost wasn't stuck inside along with him, it might have been endurable. Forget 4 or 5 years. Keeping his poor little life safe for 4 or 5 months seemed difficult to do, let alone years. After stewing in frustration for a bit, he realized that he really had no options at hand, and that he would have to just deal with the situation. Finally, he crept out of the ice cave to try to figure out exactly where he was. Almost as soon as he was out in the open, he heard the crackle of thunder, and could see that, not too far off, endless thunderclouds filled the sky, along with never-ending lightning. Lightning, he murmured, his eyes flickering with hesitation. He suddenly thought back to the 9 Heavens Cloud Lightning sect, and how the lightning bolts there had increased his cultivation base. However, he had also reached a point where the lightning bolts didn't aid him, and he had been unable to consume them. At that point, he had nearly been fried to death. He was torn over what to do, and was trying to decide what decision to make when, all of a sudden, he saw a strand of black smoke a few dozen meters behind him on the ice. The instant that smoke appeared, it converged into a fist-sized ghost face, which looked over at him. Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide, and he lurched into motion with a shriek of anguish. Found you at last, the ghost face said, smiling cruelly. At the moment, more than 10,000 similar wisps of black smoke in other locations on the ice plain all formed into ghost faces that spoke the exact same words. The more than 10,000 ghost faces rose up into the air and began to speed in the direction of the one that was closest to Bai Xiaochun. It took only a short moment for them to converge and transform into a towering ghost face. You're always messing things up for me, you little punk, the ghost face roared. I'm not going to give up until I skin you alive. With that, it began to pursue Bai Xiaochun. Earlier, after abandoning the chase, he had made an attempt to wrest control of the magical item. Unfortunately, he found that the other divine soul which he had been competing against had been a bit faster, making his own efforts completely useless. Furthermore, his cultivation base level didn't qualify him to interrupt the process. The only option he could think of was to destroy the entire magical item, but that was something he could only have succeeded at when at his peak level of power. In his frustration and anger, he decided that he would first kill Bai Xiaochun, and then come up with a way to solve the problem later. After using a secret magic to split into 10,000 parts, he had spread out in all directions, and finally found Bai Xiaochun. The first time, the Celestial showed up, he said angrily. The second time, I didn't have the attention to spare to kill you. The third time, that damned spirit automaton teleported you away. You're pretty lucky, punk. But I refuse to believe that on this fourth time, you'll escape into a bunch of lightning that even I'm fearful of. Although the ghost face was coming to find that this Bai Xiaochun was relatively hard to kill, he still snorted coldly and shot after him as quickly as possible in the direction of the thunderclouds. As he closed in, he spit out a burst of black smoke that transformed into a clawed hand that attempted to grab Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun's heart was filled with a sensation of deadly crisis. Without any hesitation, he spit a beam of black light out of his mouth, which was the turtle walk. Pushing it out almost like a shield, he used it to defend against the clawed ghost hand. A boom rang out, and Bai Xiaochun coughed up a mouthful of blood. The force of the blow sent him flying backward, flesh torn and bleeding, cultivation base unstable. However, the fearsome regenerative power of the undying blood immediately began to heal him. In fact, he even borrowed the momentum to shoot forward, simultaneously using his undying hex. Another treasure, the ghost face said, shocked by the sudden appearance of the turtle walk. Then his face lit up with delight. As for Bai Xiaochun, his eyes were now completely bloodshot. Even defending himself with the turtle walk had resulted in significant injuries, which made sense considering the vast difference in battle prowess between himself and his opponent. Given how closely he was being pursued, he realized that he only had one chance, the thundercloud region. Although the lightning constantly smashed the ground to bits in terrifying fashion, and the horrors of Lightning Penitentiary were still fresh in mind, he had no other options. Time to go for broke, he roared. Even as the ghost face closed in, Bai Xiaochun blurred into motion toward the thunderclouds. The instant he entered the region, a lightning bolt locked onto him and shot down. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.